Stop acting obsolete, Janet. Those bolts are surface rust, not a shutdown, Superintendent Derek Hale said on the mat foundation at 6:40 a.m., loud enough for the steel crew, the concrete pump operator, and the two laborers stringing barricade tape to hear every word. By 6:41, workers on the south side had gone still or found somewhere else to look. From where Janet stood, he was not arguing a technical point. He was drawing a line in public, turning procedure into ego, and making her choose between compliance and humiliation in front of a full morning crew. Janet Robinson kept her gloves on and her clipboard level, even as the insult landed like a metal strike inside her chest. The tower crane rose 62 meters above them, painted white and red against a clouded morning sky, jib still and waiting for first pick. At the mast foot, she had chalked reference marks around the base ring during pre-shift inspection. Her flashlight still hung from a lanyard at her vest pocket. The chalk lines, rust streaks, and cracked grout were less dramatic than Derek's voice, but she trusted quiet evidence over loud authority. She looked down once, confirmed the bolt map she had drawn by hand, then looked back at him. "I flagged 4 bolts with measurable thread loss," she said. "One nut backed off under wrench pressure. That is not cosmetic." Derek gave a short laugh meant for the audience around them. "You always do this. We're already behind concrete, behind steel, behind billing. You find one orange stain and call it a structural crisis." He stepped closer and tapped the clipboard with 2 fingers. Not hard, just possessive. "You're lazy when schedule shows up. That's what this is." The word lazy hit the crew exactly as Janet expected. It made people shift their weight and glance away. The pump operator shut his hopper gate to listen, engine idling at a low diesel rumble. A rigger near the rebar stack adjusted his hard hat and stared at the slab. Janet heard the sight in layers. Forklift reverse beeps from the north laydown yard. Wind moving loose caution plastic. The faint metallic tick from the craned ladder as temperature climbed with sunrise. She had worked heavy civil for 19 years, in winter bridge decks and summer high-rise pours. Under superintendents she respected and superintendents she tolerated. And she knew when a public insult was a pressure tool. Derek was trying to make technical doubt look like personal weakness. She opened her field notebook to the inspection page and turned it toward him, one gloved finger on the logged timestamps. Pre-shift started 5:32 a.m., anchor pattern, 16 bolts at base cage, spec torque retention check required before lifting after weather exposure. I measured pitting depth beyond tolerance on 4 threaded sections. I documented halo cracking in grout at 3 o'clock and 7 o'clock positions. Standing water at ring perimeter. Wind advisory. Climbs this afternoon. I am placing this crane on restricted pending structural review. Derek leaned back, eyes narrowing, then pitched his voice even louder. "You hear this? Pending review." He swept his arm toward the crew as if introducing a performer. "We're paying premium rate for theater." Then he turned back and dropped his voice enough to sharpen it. "Do your job." Her jaw tightened, but her words stayed flat. "I am doing it." For 1 second she watched him choose escalation. He had a clean white hard hat with no scratches on the brim and a dark jacket without dust on the cuffs, and he wore both like proof that he controlled outcomes. "Cowardice in a vest is still cowardice," he said. "One bundle, one, then your precious paperwork." Janet felt the sting of that one more than obsolete and lazy. Coward was the oldest trick in high-risk work, the fastest way to recruit silence. She had seen it on marine picks, bridge girder sets, and refinery turnarounds. Call the cautious person afraid. Call the checklist person rigid. Call the stop work person disloyal. Physics never changed because language got crueler. She kept her voice at normal volume so people had to lean in to hear it. If preload drops on one side, slewing load shifts. The mast begins micro-rotation, then the base walks. Once it walks, gravity rights the rest. A few heads turned at that, not toward Derek, but toward the bolt circle. The steel foreman, Mark Ellison, crouched and ran a hand near one anchor location without touching it. Janet watched his eyes stop at the rust line, where water had dried in crescents. He did not speak. He stood and looked at Derek, then at Janet again, and that hesitation told her he understood enough to be worried. Derek saw it too and snapped the moment shut. "Mark, you're not engineering now," Derek said. "You're waiting on a lift. We are pouring podium wall this afternoon and the lender walkthrough is tomorrow. I need steel in position by 10. He pointed at Janet's notebook. "And I need that signature released." The daily lift authorization log sat clipped under her inspection sheets, her name already printed in block letters above the operator line. One signature and the chain moved. Lift plan active. Pick sequence legal. Liability redistributed. Risk normalized on paper. One refusal and the chain stopped in full view of payroll, subcontractors, and management metrics. She had trained younger operators to understand that forms were not bureaucracy. They were force diagrams translated into legal language. Derek treated them as a scheduling inconvenience. That difference was the whole problem. She lowered the clipboard to her side and stepped toward the base cage. Rust dust marked the grout where she had wire brushed the exposed threads 20 minutes earlier. She pointed to a bolt head with orange-brown scale around the washer seat. This bolt should hold clamp force after torque verification. It did not. The nut moved without full resistance. That indicates preload loss or thread damage. Either condition requires engineer review under our site procedure and insurer protocol. She shifted to the next marked location. This cracking pattern around grout is radial and connected. It is not paint failure. It is movement evidence. Derek cut in. It is old grout and rainwater. It is load path warning. He folded his arms. You're finding problems because you like control. That line would travel across the site by coffee break, she knew, because it was simple and insulting and easy to repeat. Technical language took effort. Mockery took none. She felt heat rise under her collar, anger mixed with something colder. The recognition that her professional judgment was now being tested by someone with authority to reassign her, but not authority to negotiate with structural mechanics. The tower crane stood over all of them like a verdict waiting to be read. At 7:05 a.m., with the sun climbing behind thin cloud, Derek made it formal. Direct instruction, release first lift authorization. We do one final steel bundle, then inspect again. That is a reasonable compromise. Janet did not look at him immediately. She looked at the masked foot paint mark she had set against the base plate. A hairline offset could hide there before becoming visible to everyone else. She looked at the nut she had marked with a grease pencil and remembered the way it gave under wrench load without the expected resistance curve. She looked at the trapped water ring reflecting gray sky. Then she turned to him. I can't authorize a dynamic load on compromised anchors. His mouth tightened. You can, you won't. Correct? Derek took one step closer until only a clipboard's width separated them. I can replace operators. I can flag payroll exceptions. I can note non-cooperation on performance review. Do not confuse certification with immunity. She met his stare. Do not confuse rank with structural approval. The exchange drew a silence that felt heavier than noise. Even the pump operator throttled down to idle. A crane this size did not care about personalities, only vectors, preload, and wind. The crew knew that in their hands, in their knees, in the way they flinched at strange vibration before they could explain it. Derek tried one more time. Softer now, almost conversational, which made it more dangerous. Janet, we both know how this game works. We make the morning window, we keep everyone funded, then we clean up details. You lock this crane now, you blow the poor sequence, and you own that. She almost laughed at the phrasing, own that. As if ownership could be assigned by voice when consequences were assigned by law and gravity. I own my license, she said. I own my log entries. I own every lift I clear. That is why the crane stays restricted. The steel foreman exhaled through his nose and glanced toward the gang box. One of the riggers checked his phone and typed quickly, likely sending the first text of the day about the standoff at Tower 2. Derek scanned the faces around him. Too many eyes stayed on him, and a few phones were already out. He straightened, turned half away, and spoke into his radio mic clipped to his vest. Operation standby. We have an operator refusal at Tower 2, pending superintendent direction. The word refusal hung there, official and loaded. Janet wrote the time in her notebook with steady block letters. 7:09, superintendent direct order declined. Mechanism explained. Crane status restricted pending structural review. She added weather note and witness initials where she could get them. Her pulse was fast, but her handwriting stayed clean. That mattered later. Derek looked back at her one last time and gave the crew a final line meant to cut deeper than the first. If experience turns into paralysis, it's obsolete, he said. We move with people who build. Janet clipped the pen to the notebook, closed it, and faced him without raising her voice. People who build don't fake preload and call it progress. She did not wait for an answer after that. Janet turned back to the crane base, dropped to one knee on the damp mat, and set her clipboard on a stack of timber dunnage so she could work with both hands free. The rust ring around the anchor pattern was clearer now, that the sun had climbed high enough to flatten shadows, what looked like staining from 10 feet away, resolved into active section loss up close, rough-edged pitting around thread roots, flaking scale near the washer seats, and a dark tide line where water had sat overnight against steel that should have stayed dry. She took a stainless pit depth gauge from her vest pouch, cleaned one thread crest with a wire brush, and pressed the tip into the deepest cavity on bolt A3. The needle settled at 1.62 millimeters. Site tolerance for that diameter and load class was 1.0 millimeters maximum before mandatory engineering review. She wrote the number, circled it twice, and moved to A4. Mark Ellison crouched beside her, quiet now. No performance for the crew. Could still hold if only one's bad, he said, not as a challenge, more as a question he wanted answered before he admitted what he already suspected. Janet kept her eyes on the threads as she measured A4 at 1.48 millimeters and a 7 at 1.31. Bolts don't work alone, she said. This ring is a clamp system. You lose cross-section, you lose thread flank contact, you lose flank contact, nut rotation under vibration starts. Once preload decays on one side, Load transfers to neighboring anchors, then creep takes over. It is not one bad bolt, it is a redistribution event. She tapped the grout with the blunt end of her gauge. Hairline cracks radiated from the sleeve pocket at 3 o'clock and 7 o'clock, each one widening where water had dried white in the seam. And this grout isn't decorative. It tells us where movement has already started. By 7:14 a.m., she had laid a flexible steel rule across the base plate edge and the reference paint line she had set before dawn. The offset was small, less than 2 millimeters, but it existed, and it was new compared with the photo set from 2 days earlier stored in her inspection archive. She took 3 more photos now. One wide frame showing tower leg, base ring, and orientation marks. One medium frame with the bolt map tag visible. One tight frame with the gauge on A 3 threads. Metadata mattered more than dramatic images. Time, GPS, device ID, and sequence order made the difference between opinion and documented condition once lawyers and insurers arrived. She opened the camera's details view and read it aloud while Mark listened. 7:14:22, Tower 2 base, southeast quadrant. File 4821, 4822, 4823. Location lock confirmed. Mark gave a short nod and initialed her notebook beside the readings. The crane itself gave her the next warning. Not a loud one, not cinematic, just a low, periodic groan from the turntable region as the wind nudged the jib against brake preload. Steel under stable clamp force produced one kind of sound. Tight, clean, and brief. Steel under microslip produced another. A drawn-out complaint with a faint stutter at the tail end, like a wrench dragged across concrete. Janet stood, stepped back 6 meters to align her sight line with the mast foot and chalk marks, and watched through 2 gust cycles. At the first gust, nothing obvious moved. At the second, she saw a tiny twitch at the footplate, then a return, then stillness. The movement was so small a casual observer would miss it. An operator trained to read structures did not miss it. She keyed her radio on channel 3. Tower 2 currently restricted. Observed intermittent micro-displacement at mass base under gust response. No pics authorized. Repeat, no pics authorized. A laborer named Keon assigned to barricades came over holding a coil of fresh tape. "Do you want this perimeter widened?" he asked. He was new enough to ask before acting and experienced enough to recognize that tone in her voice meant rules were about to tighten. Janet looked at the existing exclusion zone, then at the direction of likely load drop if a slough began with unstable anchors. "Extend 10 meters on east and south sides," she said. "Hard barricade where you can, tape where you can't, and leave one controlled access point at the gang box corner." He started moving immediately, and she added, "Mark it as structural hold, not housekeeping, so nobody pulls it for deliveries." He repeated it back word for word, then jogged off with 2 laborers. She needed instrument confirmation, not only visual cues, so she called the tool trailer and asked for the calibrated 1-inch drive hydraulic torque wrench, serial ending 77B with current calibration sticker. When it arrived, she checked the tag herself, certified 9 days earlier. She set it to the verification value specified in the crane base installation packet and tested A3 first. The wrench engaged, loaded, and turned farther than acceptable before reaching target resistance. That was the mechanical equivalent of a siren. She stopped, marked the nut position with yellow paint pen, and logged the degree of movement. A 7 behaved similarly, though with less travel. A 9 held near expected resistance. The pattern was asymmetric, which was worse than uniform degradation, because asymmetric preload loss introduced eccentric loading into every slew and braking cycle. She did not continue around all 16 bolts. Procedure required halting verification once failure criteria appeared, because each additional turn could further disturb clamp force. At 7:22 a.m., she called EHS from the number posted inside her notebook cover and switched to speaker, so Mark could hear and witness. "This is Janet Robinson, Tower 2 Heavy Lift Specialist, employee ID 04-119. Initiating stop work documentation for structural anchor concern," she said. The safety coordinator, Priya Nandakumar, came on after one transfer. Janet kept the report mechanism first. No drama, no adjectives. 4 anchors measured above pitting tolerance. 2 nuts moved under verification torque beyond allowable rotation. Radial grout cracking in multiple clock positions. Standing water at base ring after overnight exposure. Wind advisory rising to 34-mile-per-hour gusts this afternoon. Crane status remains restricted pending structural engineer sign-off and ultrasonic thickness checks. Priya asked for photos and raw notes. Janet sent them while still on the line, then read file numbers into the call log. Priya gave her incident reference EHS-T2-0718 and said, "Do not clear this machine without written engineering release." Janet answered, "Understood." She then opened the manufacturer's base maintenance bulletin on her tablet, the one most supervisors ignored because it was dense and blunt. The language was not ambiguous. Corrosion pitting at thread roots, reduced effective area. Reduced area lowered tensile capacity and altered preload retention. Preload variation above 20% across the anchor group could permit base plate slip under dynamic overturning moments during slew, especially with gust loading. She showed Mark the paragraph and the chart for their exact anchor grade. "This is why surface rust is the wrong phrase," she said. "Color does not fail structures. Section loss does." Mark rubbed a hand over his beard, eyes on the chart. "How fast can this go bad?" Janet answered without softening it. "Slow until it isn't. Micro-slip accumulates. Then one dynamic event pushes it past elastic behavior. After that, it does not self-correct." The pump operator, Rene Alvarez, walked over from his truck with his hard hat tucked under one arm. "Dispatch says we might stand by all morning," he said. "I need something for my log. Delay code?" Janet gave him the exact wording. "Safety hold. Structural verification pending. Put my name and the EHS reference in your remarks so accounting doesn't call you non-productive." Rene nodded, typed it into his tablet, then hesitated and looked at the tower. "I heard it groan when the wind hit," he said. "Thought it was just the jib brake." Janet shook her head once. "You heard the right thing. Keep your outriggers where they are and do not stage under the swing path." He gave a curt thumbs up and headed back, visibly less annoyed about the delay now that the mechanism was clear. By 7:31 a.m., the cloud layer had thinned, and with it came steadier wind pushing dust across the mat in low sheets. Janet used a digital inclinometer against the mast access rail at 2 elevations to verify plumb trend under no-load conditions. The readings were still within alarm thresholds, but not perfectly stable between gusts. She saved each reading with timestamp and environmental notes, then attached her restricted tag physically to the cab access ladder and electronically in the dispatch system, so nobody could claim miscommunication later. On the physical tag, she wrote in block letters, "Restricted. Anchor preload integrity in question. Engineer release required." She signed and dated it, then photographed the tag in place. One evidence stream was never enough. Derek remained on the far side of the slab, speaking with project controls and pointing toward the schedule board set up near the temporary office trailers. He looked over twice while she worked, but she did not walk to him and he did not walk to her. The distance between them did not ease the pressure. It concentrated it. Everyone on site understood what a restricted tag did to a day's plan, a week's cash flow, and a month's reporting. Janet understood that too, which was precisely why she refused to reduce the issue to personalities. She wrote a final entry under the morning block. 7:36. Mechanical warning signs confirmed by measurement, torque response, and audible micro slip. Crane remains out of service pending independent structural assessment. She underlined independent. Her phone vibrated with a message from Priya. Received files, 4,821 to 4,834. Preserving originals on secured server. Do not edit or overwrite device copies. Janet replied, "Acknowledged." She opened a fresh page in the notebook for witness list and began collecting initials from anyone who had directly observed measurements, sounds, or tag placement. Not rumors, not opinions, just observations, tied to time and position. Mark signed. Renee signed. Keon signed after securing the widened barricade. A journeyman ironworker named Sal signed and added in his own handwriting, "Heard low groan at mast base during wind gust at approximately 7:16. Janet did not coach wording. She only asked for accuracy. When she finally stepped back from the base ring, the crane looked exactly the same to an untrained eye. Tall, painted, ready. That was the trap in heavy work. The most dangerous phase rarely announced itself with sparks or collapse. It announced itself with small data points that lined up into one answer if someone chose to read them. Corroded threads above tolerance. Nut rotation under verification load. Cracked grout tied to water intrusion. Micro displacement at the paint line. Audible slip signature under gust response. Every indicator said the same thing from a different angle. She locked her tablet, closed the notebook, and stayed by the barricade with the radio in her hand, waiting for the structural engineer call-out that procedure required, and the site culture kept trying to outrun. Derek stayed on the far side of the slab. Project Controls Manager Talia Brent beside him, and a rolled schedule print in his hand like a warrant. He did not approach the barricade. Janet kept her place where she was, radio clipped high on her vest, notebook tucked under her arm, eyes still tracking the mast foot and chalk line. If he wanted this argument reopened, he would do it over open channel and in full view, the same public light where he had tried to close it with an insult. His voice came across the radio first, then carried across the mat half a beat later. "Robinson, clear this hold." Janet keyed once. "No." His jaw moved once, side to side, visible even at distance. That was not a discussion prompt. "It is still no." She held up the notebook, though he was too far to read it. A 3 at 1.62 millimeters pit depth. A 4 at 1.48. A 7 at 1.31. 2 nuts rotated under verification torque beyond allowable travel. Radial grout cracking at 3 and 7 o'clock. Audible micro slip under gust loading. This crane stays restricted until structural review clears it in writing. Talia looked from Derek to the crane base and back, trying to look neutral and failing. She raised her voice toward Janet. "Do we have engineer ETA?" she asked, careful, procedural. Janet answered her, not Derek. "Priya logged incident reference EHS-T2-0718. Structural engineer call-out requested, waiting on confirmation." Derek snapped the rolled print against his palm. "You're quoting paperwork. While this site burns money, we lose this morning steel sequence, we lose podium wall pour, then rebar inspection slides, then municipal walkthrough gets pushed. That is 3 crews and 2 subcontractors idle because you want a lab report on rust." Janet turned the page and pointed at the manufacturer bulletin excerpt she had copied by hand, then keyed her radio so the words landed in recordable form. Not rust, section loss at thread root, clamp force decay, uneven preload. That causes base plate slip under dynamic overturning moment. Once slip starts, rotation at the mast foot compounds every swing cycle. He gave a short laugh with no humor in it. "You always do this performance, big words, worst case chain, and then everybody has to applaud caution." She kept her tone level. "Mechanism is not performance. It is why people go home." Derek remained where he was, just outside the widened east-south barricade line, boots on the dry strip near the far chalk marks, refusing to come closer while still trying to dominate the exchange by volume and posture. Janet felt heat rise in her throat anyway. Distance did not soften pressure. "Barricade stays as posted," she said into the radio, explicit for witnesses and logs. "Zone remains restricted." "I decide site pace," he shot back. "You decide schedule. You do not decide load path physics." She pointed to the line at the mast foot, then looked to the crew nearest her. Offset is visible against prior photo reference. He glanced toward the base, gave the line half a second, then looked away as if refusing visual evidence could erase it. "That paint mark is your mark. You created the problem, then measured your own drawing, then shut down production." Mark Ellison was close enough to hear and answered before Janet could. "I saw the old photo set from Wednesday. The line moved." Derek whipped toward him. "Did I ask you?" Mark held up both hands, palms open, then backed off 2 steps. The silence that followed had a different weight than earlier. Now people were no longer guessing what Derek might do. They were watching what he was willing to deny. Janet chose precision over force. "You requested compromise at 7:05. 1 bundle first, inspect later." "I declined because a dynamic pick is exactly what accelerates failure when anchors have asymmetric preload loss. You do not test a compromised base with more moment load." Derek stared across the distance for a long second. "You think this makes you principled?" "I think this keeps steel upright." At 7:44 a.m., wind pressed across the mat hard enough to flutter the caution tape in rapid, snapping waves. The crane gave another low groan at the turntable, then settled. A few crew members looked up at the jib tip, then down at the base without being told. Janet keyed the radio and transmitted on open channel. Voice clipped and clear. "Tower 2 remains restricted under EHS reference 718. No picks authorized. Exclusion perimeter active." She released the button and wrote the time. From the far side, Derek grabbed his own radio and cut back over her channel. "You are done making site-wide declarations without superintendent approval. Safety hold announcements do not require your approval. They require accuracy." Talia exhaled quietly, then pulled out her phone and walked a few meters away. likely calling someone above both of them. Janet did not ask who. The call chain would surface later in logs, and logs had longer memory than tempers. Derek unrolled the schedule sheet and jabbed at colored bars with one finger, presenting it to whoever stood nearest him. Look at this. Steel set by 1000, embeds by 1130, pump start at 1300. Every trade stacked. Every delay compounds. You don't get to erase that because of a couple damaged threads. Janet looked at the chart from where she stood, then back toward him. If the base walks, this entire board becomes fiction by lunch, including your cost code. You are catastrophizing. You are minimizing. He clenched the schedule print tight enough to crease it. I gave you a direct instruction. Clear one lift. She answered with the same rhythm she had used all morning, each clause anchored to a mechanism and a rule. No lift until ultrasonic thickness checks confirm residual section. No lift until full torque verification confirms preload retention across the anchor group. No lift until independent structural engineer signs release. That is site procedure, insurer condition, and manufacturer guidance aligned in one direction. Derek leaned toward his radio mic. Then hear me clearly. Refusal of a direct instruction is insubordination. Janet did not blink. Unsafe instruction is not enforceable. By 8:03 a.m., the argument had drawn a half circle of listeners at the edge of the barricade. Riggers with hooks clipped to belts, laborers holding coils of tie wire, one electrician with conduit straps in his hand, all of them still pretending they had other reasons to stand there. Janet could feel their attention without looking at them. She also felt the private pressure that came after repeated refusal, the body-level urge to end conflict quickly just to stop the gaze of a whole site. That urge had injured more workers than bad weather. She let it pass without feeding it. Derek pointed across the slab at her notebook. Put that away. You are not building a court case. You are running a crane. I am preventing one from becoming a case file. She turned a page and read back her own line so there would be no ambiguity in front of witnesses. 736, mechanical warning signs confirmed by measurement, torque response, and audible microslip. Out of service pending independent structural assessment. You enjoy this? She shook her head once. No one enjoys this. I just won't fake certainty where there isn't any. The radio at her shoulder crackled with Priya's voice. Janet EHS, structural engineer en route from West Corridor, ETA, approximately 90 minutes due traffic. Janet keyed back. Copy 90 minutes. Tower 2 remains restricted. She repeated the ETA out loud for those nearby and wrote it into the log. Derek spread his arms as if presenting the absurdity to the crowd near him. 90 minutes. We park a crane for 90 minutes because she heard a sound. Janet corrected him immediately. Because measurements exceeded tolerance and torque response failed. Sound confirmed movement. It did not create it. He dropped his hands and changed tack, colder now. I am documenting this as operational refusal causing schedule harm. Document accurately, she said. Operational refusal of unsafe lift authorization under verified anchor degradation. Include EHS reference and witness initials. He held her gaze across open concrete, then gave a thin smile that never reached his eyes. Fine, let's document all of it. He turned and waved toward site admin near the trailers. Cam, bring me a corrective action form. A minute later, Cameron Pike arrived with a clipboard and the expression of someone asked to stand between a grinder and a fuel can, Derek dictated while Cameron wrote. Employee Janet Robinson declined direct superintendent instruction to proceed with one controlled lift pending later inspection, resulting impact, critical path delay. Janet waited until he paused, then spoke to Cameron, voice steady and loud enough to carry. Add my statement. Measured corrosion pitting above tolerance on 4 anchors. Nut rotation beyond allowable travel on 2 anchors during verification torque. Visible grout cracking and recorded micro-displacement. Restriction filed under EHS-T 2-0718. Engineer ETA logged. Cameron looked between them. I can put both statements. Put both, Derek said sharply. Put both exactly, Janet added. Derek's next line came without volume, which made it more threatening. If you refuse the next instruction, I file for operator replacement and payroll review. Janet answered just as quietly. If the next instruction is unsafe, yes. He nodded as if confirming a prediction. Then we are done for now. He did not come over. Instead, he called across the slab. Luis, hold up by rigging and stand by. Luis Mercado jogged up from the rigging area, young face tight, gloves tucked into his belt. He slowed when he saw Janet at the barricade, Derek with paperwork in hand, and the restricted tag still hanging. You called me, boss? Derek pointed first at the tower, then at the trailer row. You're not taking controls now. You're on standby while I prep contingency staffing if this hold drags. Stay clear of Tower 2 until I say otherwise. Luis looked at Janet first, not Derek. It's tagged restricted. It's tagged because she overreached, Derek said. I'm escalating. Paperwork first. Janet spoke before Luis could answer. Luis, listen to me. You do not have authority to clear a restricted structural tag. No one runs this crane without written release. Derek snapped. Do not coach him against instruction. I am stating procedure in front of a junior operator, Janet said. That is part of my job. Luis shifted his weight, eyes moving between them. I've only done 6 months on tower, he said carefully. I'm not trying to step on anything. I just need clear direction. Janet kept her tone factual, not pleading. Clear direction is this. Restricted means no picks. We have engineer ETA. Wait for release. Derek cut in. Clear direction is this. Hold position, stay available, and keep your gear ready. No one touches that cab until this paperwork chain is settled. Luis swallowed. If EHS asks, I'll answer for my notes, Derek said. You stay on standby. Janet opened her notebook and wrote while speaking, loud enough for nearby witnesses. 817 Superintendent announced intent to pursue replacement paperwork during active structural restriction. Junior operator briefed on tag status and lack of release. She looked up at Cameron. Witness? Cameron gave a reluctant nod and initialed the margin. Derek saw it and lifted his own clipboard toward her like a counterweight. You think writing faster makes you right? No, she said, evidence does. He pointed toward the trailer offices rather than the tower. Keep your keys. Keep your radio. But understand this. Management review starts now, and I am filing it as soon as I get to a desk. Janet gave a short nod. File what you need. Restriction stands. At 8:24 a.m., the wind shifted southwest and strengthened in irregular pulses. Tape snapped. Loose plastic skittered along the mat. The crane remained still, but the stillness now felt provisional, like a paused machine rather than a safe one. Janet stepped back to the barricade line and watched Luis, who stayed planted near rigging and did not move toward the ladder. He looked at her once more. "Janet, if I say no to pressure, I'm done here." She answered him with the same blunt fairness she had wanted someone to give her when she was new. "If you say yes to a bad lift, you may be done in worse ways. Your call. Make it with open eyes." From the far side, Derek raised his voice so everyone heard the hierarchy reasserted without any active handoff. "Luis, remain on standby. Nobody climbs Tower 2 until further notice." Luis took a breath, pulled on his gloves, and stayed where he was as Janet wrote the time with a steady hand. The radio on Janet's vest cracked again at 8:25, and Derek's voice came clipped and decisive, the tone he used when he wanted a decision to sound procedural after it had already been made. "Tower 2 team, prepare for a controlled reposition. No production pick yet. We are conducting a functional check and one partial load transfer to maintain sequence readiness." He did not use the word override. He did not use the word restricted. He spoke as if language could rewrite the tag hanging on the cab ladder and the notes in her book. Janet looked up from the page, then at the restricted tag fluttering lightly in the wind. It was still there. She keyed her radio. Negative. Structural restriction active. No functional check with dynamic motion. No load transfer of any kind. Derek answered at once. "Logged your objection. Superintendent authority proceeding under contingency operations." The sentence was polished enough to sound legal, which told her he had either rehearsed it or borrowed it from someone in the trailer with a spreadsheet and no view of the base ring. Louis stood where Derek had left him, gloves on now, helmet strap tightened, trying to keep his face neutral and failing. Derek pointed toward the ladder. "Luis, climb and power up. Keep speed low. We will do a short slew at minimal radius, then hold." Luis hesitated half a second and looked toward Janet. She held his gaze and shook her head once. "Do not climb a structurally restricted crane," she said loud enough for the nearest crew to hear. Derek snapped back. "He is climbing under my instruction and my assumption of responsibility." Janet answered without raising volume. "Responsibility does not transfer mechanical load." Cameron, still holding the clipboard from the corrective form, took one involuntary step backward as if distance itself might become a witness statement. At 8:27, Derek strode to the barricade corner, ducked under the tape, and walked straight to the cab ladder. He grabbed the restricted tag, tore it free, and handed it to a laborer with a curt flick of his fingers. "Clear access," he said. The laborer froze with the tag in his hand, then tucked it awkwardly into a vest pocket. Janet photographed the moment from 3 angles, ensuring Derek's face, the ladder, and the missing tag were all in frame. She sent the photos to Priya and added one line: 8:27 restricted tag removed by superintendent during active hold. Priya's reply came in less than 20 seconds. "Preserve scene. Do not engage physically. I am escalating to director." Janet read it once, locked her screen, and stepped closer to the perimeter without crossing it. Luis put one boot on the first rung, then another. His movements were careful and slow, not the confident climb of a routine shift start. Janet keyed the radio again. "Luis, confirm you understand crane status was restricted for anchor preload integrity and pending structural engineer release." Static. Then his voice, tight through his mic. "Confirmed," Derek cut in over him. "Also confirmed superintendent direction to proceed with controlled movement." A pause, then Luis again. "Confirmed." Janet wrote both confirmations with exact times and underlined them. Mark Ellison moved beside her, jaw clenched, eyes on the ladder. "He's too green for this pressure," he muttered. Janet did not look away from the mast foot. "Pressure is the point," she said. "If he says yes, Derek gets motion on paper." By 8:30, Luis was in the cab, running pre-start checks. The crane powered alive in stages. Control screens lit. A low electrical hum rose through the mast. Then hydraulic systems came online with a familiar whine that usually reassured operators. Today it sounded like a machine being asked to lie. Janet watched the paint reference line at the base ring through each gust pulse. She could see fine dust along the grout seam shiver with vibration. Derek stood in the open, headset on, one hand at his radio, the other making small forward gestures as if the tower would obey hand signals better than force diagrams. "Luis, bring hook clear and hold 10 meters, he said. "No load yet?" The empty hook block lifted and swayed, steel cable humming in the wind. At first, the base stayed visually quiet. Then a soft groan came from the turntable region, longer than normal brake chatter, and Mark swore under his breath. Janet transmitted on open channel so every radio on site caught it. "Audible slip signature at slew start. Stop movement now," Derek answered. "Continue. Slow speed." Luis said nothing. The hook began a shallow swing toward the laydown area where a steel bundle sat pre-slung, tagged for the delayed podium sequence. Janet could read the tag from where she stood. B-17 9.6 tons balanced 4-point rig. It was not a partial load. It was a full production bundle. She keyed again. "That is a production pick. You are no longer in functional check." Derek replied, "We are taking one controlled transfer and setting immediately. Keep recording if that makes you feel better." The crew on the south side started clearing backward without instruction. Boots scraping on concrete, bodies angling away from the swing path. At 8:33, the hook settled over B-17. Riggers clipped in and gave the all-clear hand signal with visible reluctance. One of them, Sal, stepped to the side and pointed at the base ring, then at Derek, then made a cutting motion across his throat, meaning stop. Derek ignored him and keyed up. "Take weight." Luis feathered the hoist. The rigging slings tightened. The bundle lifted 2 centimeters, then 10, then cleared the dunnage. The crane emitted a low, uneven groan that traveled through the slab into Janet's boots. She dropped to one knee at the barricade line, sighted along her chalk mark and base plate edge, and saw it. A tiny but undeniable creep at the southeast quadrant, metal against grout, then a return that didn't quite return to origin. Micro-rotation. Exactly the sequence she had warned. She stood and shouted into radio and open air at the same time. "Stop swing now. Base displacement increasing." Derek's response came instantly, almost bored. "Keep moving. We're behind." He pointed toward the set location as if schedule itself were a lifting device. Luis began the slew, slow but continuous, jib rotating over the mat while the load hung just above head height for speed. Janet could hear 3 distinct layers of sound now. Cable under tension, turntable drive engaging, and a rough grinding undertone from below where no rough grinding should exist. Keon, the barricade laborer, ran along the east tape line yelling for everyone to get farther back. Most moved. One carpenter trying to retrieve a laser tripod left near stacked form panels inside the extended zone darted in, grabbed the case, and turned to run out. Janet saw him and keyed hard. "Zone breach at east side. Clear out now." He sprinted for the tape and got clear as the load passed, But the breach burned itself into her mind as the next failure waiting for a bad second. The wind pulsed again, stronger, catching the suspended bundle broadside and adding a lateral shove to the ongoing slew. The mast flexed within normal visual limits, but the base did not answer like a healthy clamp system. Janet saw the paint line at the foot shift a fraction more, then hold offset. "Luis, emergency stop," she called. "Set load down where you are." Luis came back, voice thin. "I'm getting vibration through the seat." Derek overrode before Janet could answer. "Ignore chatter. Continue to set point." Talia had moved closer by then, phone in hand, face pale. "Derek, we should pause," she said quietly but audibly. He did not even turn. Not now. Dread on a job site had a physical form. It was the moment experienced workers stopped talking because language no longer influenced outcome. At 8:34 and some seconds, that silence took the south half of the slab. Janet heard only machinery, wind, and the clipped breathing in her own headset. She opened her camera to video and framed mast foot, base ring, and Derek in one shot, narrating timestamps under her breath so metadata and audio aligned. Slew under load active. Visible base drift southeast. Superintendent command to continue acknowledged. Mark stood beside her with both hands on his hard hat, elbows wide, eyes fixed on the chalk mark. "It's walking," he said. Not loudly, not dramatically, just fact. Janet keyed one last warning with every word deliberate. All units. Tower 2 base displacement confirmed. Evacuate swing and drop zones immediately." 8 seconds later, the out-of-plumb alarm hit. A sharp repeating tone from the cab that cut through every other sound on site. Luis shouted, "Alarm! Alarm! Mast out of plumb!" Derek yelled back, "Set it down now. Keep control." 14 seconds later, the load path shifted in a way Janet could see with no instrument. The suspended bundle pendulumed. Not from operator error, but from geometry, changing under the crane itself. The mast kinked visibly just above the turntable. A subtle bend, becoming a decisive dogleg in one breath. Steel screamed. Not a bang, not a pop. A long tearing shriek that made people flinch and duck even when they were already running. 21 seconds later, the base cage tore its bond with the concrete mat. Grout spat out in pale chunks. Rebar ties snapped with a rapid metallic crackle. The entire tower lurched sideways, like a door forced off a bent hinge, then rebounded just enough to throw the hanging bundle into a violent arc. Janet saw the southeast anchor cluster rise a few centimeters from its seat, and then slam back crooked. Gravity took over. The bundle dropped from mid-swing, hit staged formwork, and folded it flat in a blast of timber splinters, steel ringing, and dust. Momentum carried one loose end into two parked telehandlers along the exclusion edge, caving cabs and shoving one machine onto its side with a heavy grinding crash. The slab disappeared in concrete dust and pulverized grout. Alarms from the telehandlers started blaring in alternating tones. Someone screamed for medics over Channel 1, voice breaking. Janet crouched instinctively behind a stack of rebar mats as smaller debris rattled across the ground around her helmet and shoulders. She kept the radio pressed. Emergency, Tower 2 structural failure, load dropped, equipment strike, initiate site incident command now." Priya came through almost immediately, controlled and fast. "Command established at Trailer 1. Confirm injuries." Janet rose enough to scan through the dust cloud, eyes burning, and started counting people by vest color and last known positions. Luis was still in the cab, hands visible through the front glass, frozen over controls, eyes wide and unfocused. The cab itself remained attached, tilted off true, but intact. Derek stood 15 meters from the base, no longer signaling, no longer speaking, staring at the torn ring as if waiting for it to deny what it had already done. Talia was on her knees beside the east tape line with one injured rigger who had gone down during the rush out. The injury looked serious but survivable. No heavy bleeding visible from Janet's angle. Near the crushed formwork, a carpenter lay motionless beside scattered panels where the dropped bundle had landed after the zone breach and retreat confusion. Keon and Sal reached him first and began shouting for a backboard. Janet ran to the perimeter edge, stopped herself from crossing into unstable ground, and redirected incoming workers away from the compromised zone. "Do not approach the base. Secondary movement risk," she yelled. "Use east route only. Keep clear of the massed footprint." She switched channels and gave dispatch exact needs. 2 ambulances, 1 heavy rescue unit, 1 fire suppression standby for hydraulic leak potential. Diesel smell mixed with hot metal and dust, coating her tongue. She coughed once, wiped grit from her eyes, and resumed counting. 5 visibly injured across the slab and rigging area, 1 unresponsive near impact point, multiple near misses with no immediate trauma signs. The crane settled into a crooked stillness. Leaning off plumb by a margin, no operator needed an instrument to confirm. Cable continued to sway gently over wrecked formwork. The out-of-plumb alarm kept beeping until power finally cut. Then the sudden quiet hit harder than the noise had. In that quiet, Janet could hear people calling names, answering names, checking each other by touch and eye contact, like they had practiced, but hoped never to use. Mark reached her side, face gray under dust. "You called every step," he said hoarsely. Janet did not answer him. She was already reading from her notebook into the radio for the incident log, voice steady by discipline alone. Initial failure sequence observed under active production pick after denied restriction. Alarm at +8 seconds. Load path shift at +14. Base cage rupture and load drop at +21. Exclusion breach contributed to casualty exposure. Derek finally moved, taking 3 slow steps toward her through drifting dust. Tie loosened, hard hat askew, expression emptied of the certainty he had worn since dawn. He opened his mouth once, closed it, then said, "Shut the cameras down." Janet held her phone at her side but kept audio running for chain of custody continuity. "No," she said. "Evidence preservation is active." Priya's voice came in her earpiece again, firm enough to cut through everything. "Janet, secure your original files and remain available for first statement. Do not surrender device to anyone except EHS director or investigators." Janet answered. "Understood." Sirens reached the gate less than 4 minutes later. As responders entered, Janet handed command a rapid map of hazards: unstable base, potential secondary shift zone, fuel and hydraulic points, safe approach corridors, and last known worker locations. She gave it without dramatics, one fact at a time, because panic wasted seconds, and seconds were now the only currency that mattered. Behind her, the tower stood wounded and crooked over a torn base ring, exactly the chain she had described at 640 when insult was still cheaper than repair. Physics had taken Derek's compromised language, his schedule math, his direct orders, and converted all of it into broken equipment, sirens, and a slab full of people learning the same lesson at full price. Paramedics crossed the mat at a controlled run, helmets low, trauma bags bouncing against their hips, while the battalion chief took one look at the leaning tower and ordered a hard perimeter expansion to 50 meters. Janet stayed at the east corridor marker and repeated the hazard map to each incoming team until they echoed it back correctly. Unstable base at southeast quadrant. No approach inside the massed footprint. Load impact zone across crushed formwork. Hydraulic leak potential near the toppled telehandler. She heard herself sounding calm and mechanical, and she kept that tone on purpose. Calm was not comfort. Calm was throughput. At 8:41 a.m., the first medic team reached the unresponsive carpenter near the collapsed form panels. Keon stepped back, hands dusty, face rigid, and gave the medic a quick report of what he had seen. Sal held pressure on another worker's shoulder laceration at the tape line, speaking in short, clipped sentences that were half reassurance and half inventory. Stay with me. You're with me. Breathe in. Good. Again. 2 more crews moved to the telehandler impact area where one operator had been thrown against a cab frame when the bundle struck. Nobody shouted now except command staff. The workers had shifted into the narrow, disciplined rhythm of an emergency scene. Point, confirm, carry, report. Janet's radio chirped with Priya's voice on Incident Net. Janet, I need casualty confirmation for external notification. Janet scanned from east to south, counting by vest and location as responders tagged patients. 1 critical unresponsive at primary drop point. 5 additional injuries with mixed trauma severity, all receiving treatment. No secondary collapse yet. Crane remains off-plumb and unstable. Priya came back instantly. Copy. State Industrial Safety Board and insurer notice are being initiated. Preserve all originals. Janet acknowledged, then read the exact file sequence already captured on her phone and tablet, so EHS could lock chain of custody without delay. Derek stood 10 meters away from command tape, dust on his jacket for the first time all morning, trying to speak to a fire lieutenant who was no longer listening to him as superintendent. In an emergency zone, hierarchy reordered itself around technical authority. The lieutenant pointed at the tower, then at the widened perimeter stakes, and said flatly, "Your project control ends outside this line until scene stabilization." Derek opened his mouth to argue schedule and got cut off with a raised palm. "No, we're in life safety and structural instability. You wait." He stepped back, jaw tight, and turned toward site admin instead. "Get me legal, now." By 8:52 a.m., Command established 3 sectors: medical, structural hazard, and evidence preservation. Janet was assigned to hazard liaison because she knew the crane system and had observed the failure sequence in real time. A state trooper arrived to secure access control, and the project gate switched from delivery mode to incident lockdown. Every truck due for morning material drops lined up outside on the frontage road, while dispatch rerouted concrete, rebar, and embedded steel to holding yards. Through the gate fence, drivers leaned out windows watching the immobilized crane tilt over the slab like a warning sign written in steel. The first hard numbers began landing at 9:06 a.m. from the triage tent. 1 worker was pronounced deceased at scene after failed resuscitation efforts. 2 were transported with serious injuries, 2 with moderate injuries, and 1 with minor trauma treated on site. Janet wrote each count in block letters, then rewrote them when Command issued the corrected roster tied to payroll IDs. Accuracy mattered more than speed now. Incorrect names in first reports could trigger notification failures and legal exposure on top of grief. She looked once toward the covered area near the formwork and then back to her notebook. Emotion could wait. Records could not. At 9:15 a.m., the structural engineer, who had been 90 minutes out, finally arrived to a site that no longer needed a preventive review and instead needed a failure assessment. He was pale when he saw the torn base ring and offset mast. "Do not let anyone touch the turntable," he said immediately. "No re-energizing, no unloading attempts, no improvised bracing until we model residual stability." Janet gave him her measured pit depth notes, torque observations, and time-stamped photos. He read for 30 seconds, looked up, and said, "These are clear pre-failure indicators." She did not answer. The sentence was for the record, not for her. 3 days earlier, the same mat had been scheduled for a clean sequence. Steel set, podium wall prep, concrete pump mobilization, lender walkthrough package, by end of week. By 10 a.m., that plan had been replaced by an incident board listing ambulance case numbers, witness interview slots, and equipment isolation tasks. Command posted a red stop work order at the gate and another on the trailer door. The order covered the entire project, not just Tower 2, because the dropped bundle had damaged shared access corridors and shaken confidence in all lifting operations. Subcontractor foremen stood in a cluster reading the notice in silence, each one calculating payroll burn for idle crews. Derek tried to regain narrative control in the first internal briefing at 10:22 a.m., framing the motion as a controlled transfer that destabilized under unexpected gust interaction. Janet listened from the side table while investigators recorded audio. She asked for permission to clarify and received it. "Wind was advisory and known," she said. "The destabilization mechanism started at compromised anchor preload, documented before operation. Restriction was active. Tag was removed at 8:27 by superintendent. Production pick proceeded under override, despite repeated stop calls." She handed over the photo of Derek removing the tag, then the radio log with timestamps. At +8, +14, +21 seconds. The lead investigator, a former heavy lift inspector, nodded once and marked the timeline board. At 11:05 a.m., insurer notification moved from routine claim intake to major loss protocol. The risk officer on speakerphone asked the same 3 questions twice. Was the crane under an active restriction? Was there documented warning prior to operation? Who authorized continuation after warning? Priya answered from compiled records and deferred technical specifics to Janet, who read from her notebook without embellishment. Active restriction confirmed. Warning documented through measurement and torque verification. Continuation authorized by superintendent over operator objection. The line went quiet for a beat. Then the risk officer said, "Understood. Preserve all device originals and metadata. Do not alter or annotate source files." That sentence, delivered in a neutral tone, carried the first financial verdict even before dollar figures were finalized. By noon, damage assessment teams had enough access to issue preliminary equipment losses. Tower base cage and anchor system. Catastrophic failure requiring full replacement and forensic dismantle. Turntable and lower mass sections. Probable total loss pending manufacturer review. Suspended steel bundle. Recoverable material with deformation scrap percentage unknown. staged formwork at impact zone, destroyed. 2 telehandlers at exclusion edge. 1 total loss, 1 severe frame damage, likely uneconomical to repair. Temporary power conduit crossing south lane, severed. The first conservative total hit $8.9 million, then climbed to $10.7 million when crane dismantle logistics and structural remediation were added. Janet sat for her formal witness interview at 12:43 p.m. in Trailer 2, hard hat on the floor beside her chair, dust still at the cuffs of her jacket. The investigator asked narrow questions in sequence, and she answered each with time, mechanism, and action taken. Did she flag corrosion? Yes, with measurements. Did she restrict operation? Yes, at 7:09, and confirmed repeatedly. Did she communicate risk mechanism? Yes, preload loss, micro-rotation base walk. Did she authorize any lift after restriction? No. Did she observe override? Yes, including tag removal and direct continuation commands. When asked whether she held personal animus toward Derek, she kept her eyes on the recorder and said, "This was not a personality conflict. This was a structural one." The investigator wrote that down verbatim. Outside, the site's financial bleed accelerated in quiet ways that did not make noise like the collapse had. Concrete booked for afternoon placement had to be canceled with short notice penalties. Union crews hit guaranteed minimums while tools sat idle. Rental clocks kept running on inactive equipment. Fabricated steel deliveries were rerouted to paid storage yards. By 2:30 p.m., project controls posted the first interruption estimate, $186,000 per day in direct burn before recovery work, not counting schedule liquidated damages. Talia delivered the number to senior management over video call, voice steady and clipped, and watched every face on the screen go still when she added, "This assumes partial restart in 2 weeks. Full stop may extend." The legal layer tightened by late afternoon. State industrial safety officers served a notice of investigation and ordered all lift records, training files, and radio archives preserved under penalty. They photographed the removed restricted tag after Priya recovered it from the laborer who had been handed it, now sealed in an evidence bag with time and witness signatures. They also collected Derek's corrective action draft from Cameron's clipboard, a document that had started as discipline paperwork and now read like pre-incident intent. One officer told Site Counsel, "Potential willful violation pathway remains open pending interviews." No one asked what that meant. Everyone in the room knew. At 4:10 p.m., updated loss modeling crossed the threshold senior executives had feared. With crane replacement, structural rework, medical liability reserve, and immediate schedule impact, projected exposure reached $11.8 million. And that figure excluded long-tail legal outcomes. The lender representative on call asked whether insurance would absorb the majority. The risk officer answered with careful legal phrasing. Coverage determination is pending and contingent on compliance with safety protocols and documented override behavior. Talia muted her mic and pressed thumb and forefinger against her eyes for 2 seconds, then unmuted and said, "We should plan for constrained reimbursement." Translation for everyone listening. Cash flow just became a survival problem, not a spreadsheet problem. Janet remained on site through the evening lockout walk, moving with the structural engineer and EHS director as they marked red zones and signed isolation points. Every 10 meters she saw reminders of how quickly arithmetic had turned moral. a crushed telehandler cab, a torn grout line at the base ring, abandoned gloves near the tape where workers had dropped tools to run. At 5:02 p.m., she passed Derek outside Trailer 1, speaking with company counsel. His posture had changed from command to containment. He saw her, looked at the notebook in her hand, and looked away first. The final operational decision for the day came at 6:12 p.m., when the project executive signed a full suspension notice for 97 days pending forensic engineering, regulatory clearance, and redesigned crane foundation approval. The number landed on paper with almost no reaction from the few people still in the command area, because they were already beyond shock and into logistics. 97 days meant subcontractor claims, resequenced concrete windows, remobilization costs, and a lender draw freeze trigger if milestones slipped past contractual tolerance. It also meant every morning argument about one bundle had now been converted into a quarter-year shutdown and a death notification no one could reverse. Janet logged her last entry under fading light while responders finished packing the final evidence crate. 1819, site suspended by executive order. Incident data transferred to EHS, secure archive. Personal certification status unchanged pending interview completion. She closed the notebook, sealed her phone in the evidence envelope she had been issued for overnight custody transfer, and signed across the tape. Behind her, the tower remained tilted and silent over the fractured base, no longer a machine in service, but an exhibit in cause and effect. Physics had taken the argument, the override, the insult, and the deadline, and priced each one in bodies, steel, and time. At 6:19 p.m., immediately after her final log entry, Janet completed the initial device custody transfer step at Trailer 1 intake, handing Priya the phone, tablet, and notebook under incident protocol. So possession was formally continuous from that minute forward. At 6:27 p.m., under the temporary floodlights outside Trailer 1, Janet watched Priya set a tamper-evident case on a folding table and read the chain of custody form line by line before she asked for anything. Device 1, personal phone, source media, containing files 4821 through 4879, including restricted tag removal sequence and live failure video. Device 2, site tablet, inspection notes and manufacturer bulletin capture. Physical notebook, black cover, field entries from 532 through 1819. Confirm. Janet confirmed each item, then signed where Priya pointed as the seal and witness processing continued from the 1819 intake transfer. A state safety officer photographed the signatures, photographed the envelope seals, and placed evidence stickers over each clasp. The officer looked up and said, "From this point, any break and seal voids evidentiary confidence. Nobody opens these without dual witness." Derek came out of the trailer at that exact moment, saw the table, and changed direction toward it. His voice had lost its morning edge, but not the habit of command. "I need a copy of those files tonight." Priya did not move. "You'll get what legal releases through proper channel." "I'm superintendent." The state officer answered before Priya could. "On this scene, you are a witness with potential enforcement exposure. Step back from the evidence table." Derek stood still for 2 seconds, then took one measured step back. Janet noticed his eyes go to the notebook last, not the phone. He knew handwritten timelines were harder to spin. He opened his mouth, closed it, and walked away without another word. At 7:03 p.m., The evidence case went into a lockbox in the incident command trailer with 2 signatures on the seal log, Priya Nandakumar and Officer Daniel Reeves. Janet watched the lock turn, heard the deadbolt click, and felt the first clean breath of the day leave her chest. The things she had written, photographed, and transmitted were now in a system bigger than Derek's voice. By 8:10 the next morning, she sat in Conference Room B at district headquarters, fluorescent lights humming over a table crowded with binders, coffee cups, and one scale model of a tower base. Present were the EHS director, company counsel, 2 executives, and a regulatory lead from the state board. Derek entered late, tie changed, jacket pressed, carrying a folder that looked thinner than his confidence had ever been. The regulatory lead began without preface. "This is a formal post-incident administrative review, Mr. Hale, did you remove a restricted structural tag at 827? Derek glanced at counsel. "I authorized contingency operations." That was not the question. He swallowed once. "Yes." "Did you direct operation under active restriction after measured anchor degradation was documented?" He shifted in his chair. "I believe the condition was manageable for 1 controlled transfer." Janet slid a printed still photo across the table. Derek's hand on the tag, timestamp visible. Then she slid a second page, transcript excerpt. 8:33:14, open channel, my call. Stop swing now, base displacement increasing. 8:33:16, your response. Keep moving, we're behind. The room went silent except for the recorder's tiny motor. The executive on Janet's left exhaled and asked Derek, "Is that quote inaccurate?" Derek looked at the page for a long moment. "No." The EHS director spoke next, voice flat. "Your employment is terminated for willful safety override, record falsification attempt through pre-incident corrective framing, and breach of stop work policy." She slid an envelope toward him. "Effective immediately." He took the envelope but did not open it. "You're firing me before the full report." The regulatory lead answered, "No, they're firing you because the facts already satisfy internal cause. My office will decide statutory action separately." Derek stood, chair scraping tile, and looked at Janet as if searching for a private argument inside a public record. "You wanted this." Janet met his stare and kept her hands flat on the table. "I wanted the crane shut down for inspection." He left with the envelope in his hand and no one followed him. 3 days later, at the controlled forensic teardown, Janet stood with the structural engineer at the base ring, while technicians lifted out the failed anchors one by one and tagged them A1 through A16 on padded trays. The smell was wet concrete and cutting oil. Every removed bolt was photographed against a scale card, then bagged. When A3 came up, the thread root pitting was deeper than it had looked in place. An orange-black corrosion packed the valleys, where clean steel should have carried clamp force. The engineer held it under light and said quietly, "Residual section confirms your field reading." A 7 showed polished flank wear from movement. A 4 had asymmetric loss near the washer seat. The grout cores from 3 and 7 o'clock contained radial fractures with moisture ingress staining exactly where Janet had pointed before sunrise on the day of failure. They replayed the audio at half speed in a portable lab trailer. First groan at slew start, intermittent shudder. Alarm at +8 seconds. Shift at +14. Rupture at +21. Nothing in the sequence was random. The engineer wrote the causality chain on a whiteboard and read it aloud for the record. Corrosion-driven section loss reduced preload retention. Uneven clamp force allowed micro-slip under dynamic loading. Supervisory override introduced production pick under gust advisory. Slip transition to base walk. Base walk precipitated cage rupture and tower lurch. He set the marker down. Physics did exactly what the warning predicted. By the second week after the collapse, the state board hearing room was full of steel-toe boots, legal pads, and faces Janet knew from the slab. Mark testified first. He admitted he had gone quiet in the morning because he feared retaliation and losing his foreman slot. "I saw the paint line moved," he said, voice rough but steady. "I should have backed her louder." Louise testified next, both hands clenched around a paper cup. "I confirmed restricted status on radio," he said. "I also followed superintendent direction. I felt vibration through the seat and heard the alarm. I asked to set down." Cameron produced the original corrective action draft from his archive email, time-stamped before the failure. Talia read from her phone records and admitted she had started to say, "We should pause," and never pushed harder when Derek ignored her. The board chair thanked each witness and said, "Silence under pressure is a recognized hazard pathway. This record reflects that." No one in that room disputed the odd details anymore. The low groan was logged as audible evidence of slip. The trapped water ring was cited as corrosion accelerator. The dust shiver at the grout seam was correlated to vibration onset. The laser tripod retrieval during zone breach was mapped as exposure amplification, not root cause. Even the torn restricted tag, recovered from the laborer and sealed the same day, was entered as Exhibit 12 and matched by fiber transfer to Derek's glove cuff from scene photos. In month 3, Janet sat in a lender-insurer joint review because the carrier demanded live technical clarification before final coverage determination. The room was glass-walled, too clean and too quiet compared with any job site she trusted. A claims counsel read from a letter without dramatic tone. Coverage for major structural and equipment loss is denied under willful noncompliance exclusion, based on documented override of active restriction, ignored stop-work communications, and authenticated metadata. Across from Janet, the developer's finance lead asked, "Denied in full?" The counsel nodded. "For the primary loss, yes." The lender representative closed a folder and said, "Then draw requests are frozen pending recapitalization plan." He turned one page and added, "2 municipal bid committees have already requested incident disclosure supplements. We cannot treat this as contained reputationally." The numbers followed in hard sequence. $11.8 million direct loss confirmed. 97-day stoppage unchanged, plus carrying costs that no insurer would absorb. Derek's half-day schedule push had become a quarter-year cash wound with public records attached. 2 weeks later, in a county courtroom that smelled of old wood and copier toner, Derek sat at defense table while the clerk read charges under state industrial negligence statutes tied to fatality and falsified lift records. His attorney argued he had relied on operational judgment in a dynamic environment. The prosecutor stood and answered with exhibits, not adjectives. The tag removal photo, the radio transcript, the pre-incident corrective draft, and Janet's restricted entry at 7:09. Janet testified from the witness stand, with her notebook open to the original ink. "I wrote what I saw when I saw it," she said. "I explained the mechanism before operation resumed. I refused authorization." On cross, defense tried motive. You had conflict with Mr. Hale, correct? Janet replied, I had conflict with unsafe instructions. The mechanism did not care who issued them. When the hearing adjourned, Derek did not look at her. He stared at the empty counsel chair beside him and rubbed his thumb over the edge of a document until the corner bent. By early winter, the company's mandatory stop-work authority training moved into every district, and Janet stood at the front of Bay 4 in a hard hat and clean gloves, a projected slide behind her showing the Tower 2 base ring with the southeast offset highlighted. Rows of operators, riggers, laborers, and junior supers listened while she walked the sequence in plain terms. If preload drops on one side, slewing load shifts. Micro-rotation starts. Base walks. Then gravity writes the rest. She paused, let the sentence land, and held up a photocopy of her first entry from that morning. Documentation is not bureaucracy. It is how truth survives pressure. After the session, Luis waited near the tool racks until the room cleared. I should have climbed down when you called stop, he said. Janet nodded once. Next time you will. He swallowed, then nodded back. Yeah. Mark came by the same afternoon and handed her a folded card signed by most of the steel crew. No speeches, no theatrics, just names and one line inside. You were right when it counted. Talia sent an email that evening attaching revised superintendent accountability language she had pushed through corporate review. It required written concurrence from EHS for any attempt to modify an active structural restriction. Cameron uploaded a retention memo confirming every source file, call log, and physical exhibit had been archived under legal hold and mirrored to training records. At 5:18 p.m., Janet locked her new field notebook in her truck, looked once at the rebuilt training mock-up of a crane base in Bay 4, and felt the day settle without noise. Derek had tried to save half a day of schedule. Reality had billed him a life, a project quarter, his coverage, his title, and his career. Her certification stayed intact. Her refusal stood. And every person in that room had heard the same non-negotiable rule stated in steel, law, and memory. Authority can pressure people, but it cannot renegotiate load paths.